Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're taking a seriously fascinating and honestly absolutely vital journey. We're going to map out the complex learning ecosystem for kids, especially those navigating the world with autism or other neurodivergent traits. Now, we usually just see the end result of a learning struggle, right? But today we're popping the hood. Using some really clear, structured maps, we're going to break down exactly what's happening, where the friction literally lives, and most importantly, how we can better understand the environment surrounding the child.
So let's dive right in with a massive question. Why do traditional teaching methods sometimes just fail to reach certain kids? It's the kind of question that keeps educators up at night and leaves parents feeling totally helpless. But here's the perspective shift we want to lock in right from the get-go. Learning friction is rarely, if ever, a failure of the child. Actually, it's almost always an environmental mismatch. When a neurodivergent learner is struggling, it's basically a giant flashing signal telling us the traditional delivery method just doesn't align with their unique neurological wiring. And decoding that signal, that's exactly our goal today.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. First, understanding learning difficulties. Second, academic and language challenges. Third, motor and attention challenges. Fourth, transitioning to the sources of difficulties. Fifth, the impact of the educational system. And finally, number 6, the role of the family environment. Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, Understanding Learning Difficulties. I want you to think of this comprehensive map as your primary diagnostic dashboard for understanding the learner's brain. Instead of just slapping on a vague label like falling behind, we can see that learning difficulties are actually a super diverse spectrum of specific processing hurdles. You look at these categories: reading, writing, math, language expression, motor coordination, attention, and it becomes obvious that learning is like a giant engine made of interconnected cogs. If even one of those cogs isn't turning smoothly, man, the whole process feels the strain. Moving right along to Section 2, Academic and Language Challenges. Now, when we really break down these core academic hurdles, we find highly specific, identifiable categories. Take dyslexia, for example. A child isn't just bad at reading. They're dealing with slow processing, frustrating spelling inconsistencies, or literally swapping the physical orientation of letters. Or look at dysgraphia. Writing isn't just messy here. We're talking about genuine physical hand pain and a real disconnect when trying to organize thoughts onto paper. And dyscalculia, it's not just getting the math answer wrong. It's a fundamental hurdle in understanding numerical concepts and even managing time. These are highly specific, isolated academic roadblocks, and they have absolutely zero to do with a child's overall intelligence. But the academic hurdles are really just one piece of the puzzle. Because beyond just reading and writing words on a page, the actual expressive and receptive language loop can be a massive friction point. Language expression difficulties mean a child might know exactly what they want to say, but physically forming the sentence, pronouncing the words, or even just processing verbal instructions from a teacher, that creates an immense cognitive load. Just imagine trying to learn a complex subject while simultaneously having to translate it in real time in your head. That is the exhausting daily reality for these learners. Which brings us to Section 3, Motor and Attention Challenges. We hear about ADHD all the time, right? But its core operational components are really distraction, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. For a neurodivergent learner, managing attention isn't just a matter of willpower, it is a dynamic, constant, and frankly exhausting physical struggle. Their brain is pulling in literally every single stimulus in the room at the exact same volume. So asking them to just focus is kind of like asking someone to listen to a whisper in the middle of a heavy metal concert. It's just not that simple. We also have to talk about dyspraxia, or motor coordination difficulties. This impacts general motor skills and physical balance, which translates directly into everyday classroom activities, everything from drawing a picture to playing sports. When there's a physical disconnect between what the brain wants to do and what the body actually achieves, it can severely impact a student's confidence. And honestly, that physical exhaustion, it bleeds right back into their academic stamina. Let's pivot a bit with Section 4, transitioning to the sources of difficulties. So here's the thing, naming the difficulty is only half the battle. Now we have to figure out where that friction actually originates. And this requires a pretty major shift in how we approach education. Instead of focusing purely on the internal symptoms, like dyslexia or ADD, we've got to look at the external sources. We need to look at the environments and systems surrounding the child, because our real power and our actual responsibility as educators and caregivers lies in addressing those external factors. Taking a macro view here, we can actually map out these external sources of learning friction. Instead of diagnosing the child, we're basically diagnosing the child's world. As you'll see, there are 4 distinct sources that can trigger, worsen, or sometimes even simulate learning difficulties: the educational system, the teacher, the family environment, and the learner's state.
All right, let's break these down, starting with Section 5, the impact of the educational system.
The educational system itself, like a super rigid curriculum, outdated teaching approaches, or just unaccommodating books and physical aids, can literally be the very thing creating the learning block. Think about it. If a curriculum demands rote memorization from a student with severe ADHD, the system is failing the student, not the other way around. Similarly, a teacher-specific approach, maybe a need for strict authoritative control, or even just a simple clash of personalities, can inadvertently become a huge source of anxiety and difficulty for a neurodivergent child. The classroom environment just has to be malleable.
And that leads us to our final core area, Section 6, the role of the family environment.
What happens at home is totally inextricably linked to what happens at a school desk. Family dynamics and underlying problems carry a massive cognitive weight for a child. On top of that, a lack of connection or open communication between the family and the school creates this incredibly fragmented world for the learner. If the strategies being used by a specialist at school aren't supported or even understood by the caregivers at home, the child is essentially left to navigate 2 completely different sets of rules and expectations. That just multiplies their friction. And of course, we always have to factor in the foundational learner state. Is the child getting enough sleep? Are there underlying health or physical conditions we're missing? What's their current psychological state? And hey, what past traumas or negative classroom experiences are they carrying in their backpack with them? We even need to look at their personal desires and interests, because if we aren't tapping into what naturally motivates that child, we are fighting a serious uphill battle. This is the foundational soil, right? It's where learning either takes root and grows, or where it completely withers. Our source materials leave us with this really direct instruction. Quote, try to classify the difficulties and their sources using the mind map for children with autism. And I love that because this isn't just dry academic theory, it's an actionable, everyday diagnostic tool for parents, teachers, and caregivers. When a child struggles, your first move is to identify the specific internal difficulty and then immediately cross-reference it with those external sources. So I want to leave you today with this one absolutely vital question to chew on. If the system itself is a source of the difficulty, how can we adapt our environment to finally support the child? The burden of change shouldn't just rest entirely on the shoulders of the neurodivergent learner. No way. By utilizing frameworks like this, we're empowered to shift our focus toward repairing and optimizing the environment around them instead. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really encourage you to take these insights directly into your own classrooms and homes.